As a refresher, it's worth taking a minute to remember who exactly we might consider a stakeholder for business analysis purposes. A stakeholder can be either an individual, a group, or an organization at large, depending on the type and scale of project that we're undertaking. If our analysis is going to require us to speak with several different companies as part of an industry-wide initiative, for example, or something where we are trying to develop a new product and working with many different procurement sources potentially, then we might want to include different organizations within our analysis. In other more typical cases, individuals and groups of individuals, such as departments within our own company, would more traditionally make our list of stakeholders. Typically, we may think of stakeholders as those who either may be affected by a project or have an effect on a project. However, it can also include those who simply perceive themselves as being affected by the project, even if we disagree that it would have any impact on them. In this case, we need to evaluate whether or not we should seek and solicit the opinions of those who fall into any of these three different categories as we begin our analysis process and put together those requirements that are going to be used later by the project. As such, we should attempt to identify stakeholders as early as possible within business analysis. That way, we have an idea of how many people we need to speak with, how many different groups there might be, some of the best methods that might exist to speak with each of them, whether it be in the form of a survey or a focus group or one-on-one interviews, among other techniques. And it also allows us to better anticipate stakeholder preferences and influences so that we can understand how the analysis process, as well as the project itself, may impact them. Understanding this results in better analysis and the development of more effective analysis plans. Stakeholders, as I said a moment ago, are often grouped based on certain characteristics for planning purposes. For example, all stakeholders who have the same use case for a piece of software under development might be considered part of the same group. Just the same, in another circumstance, we might consider all members of a certain department to be part of a group. Doing so allows us to determine how we can hopefully elicit some information in a group setting and allow us to create a narrative or a user story, as we'll see, that allows us to best represent the preferences, needs, demands, and behaviors of groups of stakeholders at once, rather than trying to deal only with individuals. This list of stakeholders should be expanded and revised continuously throughout business analysis activities. It's not something that we should do only at the beginning of our analysis, but instead something that we need to go back and review from time to time to ensure that we include all relevant stakeholders and that we remove anyone who no longer is considered relevant, either based on analysis that's taken place so far or through the common course of business. This list may be developed and maintained in coordination with the project manager, because in reality, the project manager is going to need a list of stakeholders as well. And oftentimes there will be heavy overlap between the stakeholders who we're going to speak with as part of business analysis and those that the project manager must coordinate with when work on a project begins. When creating this list of stakeholders, there are a few key techniques that can be handy. Chief among these is simply brainstorming. In this case, we want to work with a group in order to generate ideas quickly, without following any strict rule set or formal process. Here we simply ask, who do we think might be involved in the project? Who do we think might be impacted by the project? And who do we think might perceive themselves as being impacted, either by the project or its end result? The same questions apply to our analysis. Who might feel like they should be involved, or who is certainly involved or impacted by the analysis that's going to take place? For example, we might not have any intention to interview a functional manager directly, but if we need to speak with subject matter experts who are on their team in order to understand a particular component of a solution we're trying to draw the requirements up for, then we need to consider their functional manager a stakeholder as well. After all, we are going to need to tap some of their employees' time for our analysis purposes, and they need to be kept abreast of information and made to understand the value of what's happening accordingly. In brainstorming, we present ideas as they are proposed, writing them up on a whiteboard or something of this nature, so that we've got a visual identity and path that we can follow as additional ideas lead from them. Think about the functional manager, for example, and the scenario there. Perhaps there are others who could also be considered directly tied into this case, or other functional managers who we should also add to our list once that original idea had struck us. During brainstorming, if you are leading the business analysis process, the obligation is on you to help facilitate the group and ensure that all participants feel comfortable in sharing ideas. It doesn't do us any good if only a few key team members participate actively in this process. Instead, we need feedback from all of those involved. No one sees the full picture, and every person who can be part of this brainstorming session potentially has something valuable to add. Once all of these results have been collected, we should refine them into a workable list of stakeholders, as well as a set of activities that we can follow in order to further stakeholder discovery. For example, we might determine that we want to review organizational charts for our company or a certain department in order to better understand who might be considered a stakeholder and how we could benefit from their expertise or perspective. This leads into one of the other key techniques, which is reviewing organizational charts directly. Often they can indicate who or what roles will be directly impacted by analysis, a project, or the project's end result, and can allow us to skip some of the labor that goes into the research and brainstorming phase by relying on that work having already been done for us. This can include the use of any existing charts, but we may also decide to newly commission charts that best describe not just the organization as it exists, but the organization as it might exist once our requirements have been met. For example, if we are analyzing a potential project that would result in a vast restructuring of a department, then it doesn't just do us any good to look at the org chart as it exists now. We need to also look at what it might look like in order to understand all parties who might be involved and impacted. Charts specific to roles and not individuals are sometimes sufficient for planning, just the same as we might use a user story rather than an individual biography to represent groups of employees or stakeholders who might be impacted or have a similar impact on the project.